Hello. So I actually had the idea to do this video quite a while back now, and I even did quite a lot of recording back then. However, I didn't really complete it, and there were just better videos I could have done at the time, if I'm being honest. This guide is mainly for those really new to Dead by Daylight. I'm going to be covering what the objectives are for both Survivor and Killer. I'll also be getting into how to get better at each side, all of that stuff. Because for those who don't know me, I play both sides. I'd say it's probably around 50-50. When I first started it was a lot more Killer sided, and since then it's probably gradually been getting a bit more Survivor sided, but overall it probably is around 50-50. And I'd say I've played quite a bit to be able to give tips and tricks, especially since in the past I have actually played with a few people brand new to the game and helped them get much better. One other thing I should probably mention before I get into the main part of this video is that I'm gonna go into more detail on the starter characters for both Survivor and Killer. If you wanted a guide on a specific killer, this guide might not be the best for you. So, for those of you who haven't played Dead by Daylight before, it is a game where there are 4 survivors and 1 killer. As you may have guessed, the killer has to find the survivors and kill them, and the survivors have to get away from the killer and escape the match. Survivors have 5 generators they have to complete. 7 of them are in each match, so there are 2 that you don't have to do. And once you complete these 5 generators, you can then open up the exit gates, which there are 2 of in each match, and once those exit gates are open, you can then escape. With that being said, I'm now going to get into the specifics of Survivor. To make sure that I wasn't just simply repeating what you can find out from playing the tutorials in Dead by Daylight, I did play through those again. So to start off with, it just tells you very basic stuff like how to move about, vaulting windows, even just moving about the camera, all of that kind of stuff. And then later on how to do generators, as you can see here. The main takeaways I'd have from this are mainly scratch marks and the terror radius, because most of the other stuff are things you can overall just work out from playing the game normally. There's only a few other things that I should probably mention from this tutorial. First of all, I would almost never recommend getting in a locker, because killers can easily get you, and it means that they don't even have to injure you and then knock you down first. They can grab you even if you haven't been injured yet. And secondly, unhooking yourself. That is also something I would not recommend doing unless you have a certain perk for it, because I believe it's around 4% that the chance you have of unhooking yourself is, and while it didn't happen in this tutorial, the time that you're in the first hook stage is reduced from you unhooking yourself. And I believe you get usually around 3 attempts. So if you fail each one, which is almost definitely, then you'd be giving yourself even more of a chance to die. Now for the second part of this tutorial, it gets you to play against a killer who is a bot. At the beginning of the game, normally the first thing I do is instantly find a generator, but for the first part I was kind of just hoping the killer would come over. Once I realised it wasn't, no, I just started working on a generator anyway. And while I'm on this, there are a few things that aren't really ever mentioned. Claudette, as you can see there, has these weird spider hand things moving, and that means she's being chased by the killer. As it goes, it means she's no longer in chase. You may also notice that Meg there has a similar looking thing, but it's not moving, and she always has it. That just means she's the obsession, and for the most part that doesn't really mean much, apart from the fact there might be a perk related to it. Also, another useful thing is, as you can see by my name, it says I'm doing a generator and it even says the progress I'm on. So that can really help for knowing whether people are actually on gens or whether they're just messing about. And also finally, another thing I should probably mention is the building I'm in right now is called Killer Shack, and that is something that you'll probably hear many times when you play this game. It's a building that's in, I believe, every outdoor map, and the reason why it's often mentioned so much is because it's very powerful against killers. As you can see here, this is one of the ways to go around it, in other words loop it, where you keep on vaulting this window and going back around that door, and then once you've done it enough times, where the window blocks because you've vaulted it 3 times during a chase, you can normally then go over to this pallet here to then drop it on the killer. Given this scenario though, the killer went away before I could do that. And so after that, I just went to generators. There is a way to find gens a bit easier. So in a map like this, where it's outdoors, as you can see, the generators that haven't been finished actually have flashing lights. Whereas a generator you can just about see over there no longer has the lights flashing and it's just a constant one instead. That means that generator's been finished. So of course, like I said at the beginning, I've just been messing about trying to get the killer to go for me, hopefully. And it finally does. This is an awkward place to get the killer against you, of course. Luckily, the only reason why I did well here was because it's a bot. But that being said, as you could see when I was going around that rock, if there's literally nothing else you can get to, or if the killer's gonna hit you before you can make it to a pallet or window, then just do something like that as a last resort if you have to. Because the whole point of looping the killer, in other words when the killer chases you, is keeping them distracted while your teammates can do generators and heal up, all of that kind of stuff. So I hope going through this tutorial overall has maybe helped some of you understand the game a bit better. Maybe what to do when the killer's chasing you, that kind of thing. And to end off this match, here's another loop I do at the very end. So again, I go around Killer Shack, vault the window. Of course, the way I do this can only be achieved if the killer vaults after you. Also, something I'm surprised I hadn't mentioned yet is the red stain you see, which shows what direction the killer's looking in. That can be very useful because more experienced killers can actually use that to their advantage in a way, where if they walk backwards, or moonwalking as we call it, you won't see them go around the corner because they'll be hiding that red stain. And with that done, I don't think there's anything else I really need to say about doing generators or any of that kind of stuff. So now I'll just get into perks and then after that get into some real games. Man, talk about a scuffed guide. For those who don't know, that beginning part where I just went through the tutorial, that was back in February. Anyway, out of all the starter characters, there is Dwight, Meg, Claudette, Jake, Nia, Bill, and David. I think it's Ace and Feng. I'm pretty sure they're both free on console for some reason. However, on PC they're not. You have to get them with iridescent shards or get their DLC. So I won't be including those. Out of these 7 survivors, it really depends, to be honest, on what kind of play style you're going for. Now, I actually started off with David. As you can probably tell, he's also the one I main because he's also the highest prestige, and he also has the red background here. That being said, I know that David's perks especially got heavy nerfs since I started playing. If we look at his perks here, now this perk used to be one of the best in the game by a long shot. However, now it is very situational. Now you can only use it twice in the entire match. You can only use it once each time after being unhooked. Before, you could use it whenever you were injured, no matter what. Sounds great and all. I don't want this part to take too long though. How long is it on for? Ah, okay. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna have to really cut this down, aren't I? Being a bit of a trend at this point, isn't it? I'm gonna have to really simplify what I say here. Okay, I think the reason why I took an entire hour going through a bunch of perks on the survivors was because I kind of gave a bit of a history lesson on a lot of them. We don't need that. I think I'm gonna have to give a quick summary of what the survivors are like. Just say what perks are good, leave it at that. Because if I left it like this, it could probably be its own video at that point. I especially wouldn't recommend using this as a new player. Do not use this. This perk, I would say, is decent. Alright, good enough. That summarizes David. How on earth am I still on David after like 2 minutes? Anyway, summary, I would not recommend him. Even though I said I wouldn't talk about Ace or Feng. Right. Yeah, I said I wouldn't. Because not everyone gets him. I do have to say that if you do have Feng, I would recommend her as a starter character as well. Okay, yeah, fine. Sure, let's just randomly add her when I settlement. Anyway, yeah, either use Meg or Fang for your starter character. That is just the entire recommendation I have, to be honest. By far, I think they have the best perks out of all of them to use as a beginner. Oh my god, I'm still talking about Fang. Gotta be joking. Basically, exhaustion perks are ones that... Oh, hold on, wait, no, never mind. I'll keep this one in, this sounds important. Typically, it's a perk that gives you a speed boost in some way. In this example, it means after you do a fast vault, so that's over a window or a pallet, you go 150% faster 3 seconds. But as you can see here, you get exhaustion. And exhaustion, to put it simply, just means you can't use any exhaustion perks during that time. It doesn't affect your regular running speed or any of that stuff. You don't have to worry about that. It isn't as if there's stamina in this game or anything. You can infinitely run. And also, something I should probably mention about exhaustion is when it says the 40 seconds there that you'll be exhausted for, it's not as if after you use that perk, you can then use it after 40 seconds. It only goes down if you're walking, crouching, all of that kind of stuff. There's a little trick you can do where if you're in the middle of an animation, like if you do a fast vault over something for example, if you let go of your sprint button during that animation, it will still take away your exhaustion slightly. Now, Dwight, the absolute classic for beginner players. He's quite a good one overall, I'd say, given what these perks are like. Dwight is a character you'd want to use if you're always doing gens with other people, or just in general, you're always near other people, or you want to be near them. Now, Meg is one I highly recommend using. If I were to start playing the game for the first time, and I had the choice between Dwight, Meg, Claudette, Jake, Nia, and David, I would choose Meg for sure. Now, this perk is also another one I use myself. It's the one I said that I use alongside Lithe, which is one of Feng's perks. So that, alongside Lithe, which is where when you vault a window or pallet, you go faster, alongside Quick and Quiet, which means the killer won't know when you've done it. As you can probably guess, it makes a very good getaway. Now, Claudette, to put it simply, she's a medic. Now, Jake has a bit of a weird group of perks. This one means he doesn't scream. This used to be one of the best perks in the game. It's one which, to be honest, you kind of need a very specific build for. Sabotaging hooks, which is what this is for, means that a killer can't put a survivor on that hook for a while. That being said, the reason why this only really works with a whole build around it is because the killer still goes faster than the survivors even when they're carrying a survivor. So you're not easily going to be able to get to the hook before the killer unless you have other perks which let you go faster than the killer in that situation. And then Nia, she also has an exhaustion perk, Balanced Landing. It simply just means that you get the speed boost when you fall from a great height. This one is also very situational. It would be in a very specific location most of the time. I really wouldn't recommend using this perk when you have choices like Sprint Burst. Finally, Bill. Now, this perk, Borrowed Time, used to be a must-have for survivors. However, the main part of what this perk did back before would be where a survivor you would unhook could take another hit for like 20 seconds or something. That is now part of the base kit for survivors. If you unhook a survivor, they now just have that. So Borrowed Time simply just makes that last longer now. This perk can actually be very good. As you can see, it is very situational. It relies on the killer leaving you on the ground. So I realise as I see this perk that I did also forget to mention this. When you've been knocked down, you can't actually fully recover. This perk lets you do it once in that match, hence why it can actually be very strong. But like I said, it relies on the killer leaving you on the ground, or slugging as we call it. I'm telling you now, you probably won't get too many uses out of this one either. I would not recommend Bill for a new player. Out of the starter survivors, I would recommend Dwight, Meg, Claudia, and if you have her, Feng. When you reach Prestige 1, you can have that perk on every other survivor that you have. Meaning, unlike Killer, it doesn't matter what survivor you use once you have all the perks you want. Now, I haven't actually gone through every perk that you'd have as a beginner. Those were just the personal perks. There are, in fact, perks that every survivor has at the beginning of the game, regardless. Now, Dark Sense here is quite good. For anyone wondering for reference, the terror radius is typically 32 meters. Sometimes it is 24. But for the most part, it will probably mean you see the killer once you start hearing the terror radius. Next one, Deja Vu. The 6% repair speed bonus is pretty good. For just those 3 generators, I'm not too sure whether it has that much value, if I'm being honest. At the very least, I'd say Dark Sense is a better perk to use, in my opinion. Next one, Hope. So you go 7% faster. When it says exit gates are powered, that literally just means once the 5 generators are done, or if hatch is closed if you're the last survivor. If we say a survivor is 100% movement speed, then a killer's 115% normally. There are some killers like Huntress who are only 110%. So, especially if you're against a slower killer, you go only 3% slower than them in the end game. If the killer tries going for you, they will genuinely have way less of a chance at catching up to you. I'm being serious here. Around each loop, you can probably make it 1 or 2 more times than you normally would. This one's also a good one. This one literally means if you're on the hook, survivors will see if the killer's nearby you. If someone else is hooked, you'll see if the killer's nearby them. If I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea how good this is. I have no idea how long scratch marks normally stay up. It might actually be quite good, I'm not too sure. Now, the bonus blood points it says there, that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't actually give you any more than what you're allowed. To put it simply, there are these categories. In this one specifically, I think it's called Benevolence, I could be wrong. And there are 4 blood point categories. Each one you can get up to 8,000 points in. That being said, the blood points isn't the main focus of this perk, of course. What's good is that you can heal and unhook people 50% faster. And also, you can see all the survivors in the end game. Alright, this perk, this one actually goes well with Ace if you have him, because of his perks related to opening chests as well. This one means you can roughly work out where the killer is if you're not too sure. Now, Resilience. This one is one of the best perks in the game. It means that when you're injured, you get a 9% speed bonus to all of these things. This one, alongside what this used to be able to do, was insane. Spine Chill here got nerfed, unfortunately, but it used to also increase your vault speed, meaning you could vault really fast with both of them together. And on the topic of this perk, yes, this is one of the ones I actually use, and it's one of the generic ones. This one simply just means you're told when the killer is actually looking at you. So Spine Chill used to be good. I'd say it's still decent. I mean, for crying out loud, I use it. It is definitely not as good as it used to be. This is actually something you'd want to use if you wanted to try and hooking yourself. I think if you did every escape attempt that you're allowed with these extra ones as well, plus the bonus chance you have, from the first stage you'd have a 48% chance to escape, I'm pretty sure. So technically that could actually be very good if you pull it off. For the most part, totems don't mean anything, but I will get into them later, because this would be very good if the killer does have a hex totem. They're kind of like an exhaustion perk, but for killers. Right, I don't think I've ever used this perk ever. This one literally just means you get the great skill check success zone bigger, literally as you can see here, but only when you're injured. I wouldn't recommend using this one unless you really wanted to hit the great skill checks. And finally, We'll Make It. This was actually one of the perks I used when I started. I think for my original build, back when I started, but bear in mind it was back when those perks were good, it was something like Spine Chill, Dead Hard, We'll Make It, and We're Gonna Live Forever. So this perk literally means if you unhook someone, your healing speed is doubled for 90 seconds. It might be hard to imagine if you haven't played much of the game. If you went straight to healing once they were unhooked, you would probably heal them before the killer could get there. And that is all of the starter perks. I'll quickly try and think of the kind of build I'd use if I had the knowledge I have now. Okay, that was a bit awkward. I don't have any of the generic ones, because I haven't leveled her up since the prestige change. Right, I'll probably do something along these lines. So Sprint Burst, Quick and Quiet, Hope, and Spine Chill. Of course, this is purely about getting away from the killer, to be honest. That being said, if you wanted a more balanced build, maybe put on like Dark Sense or Kindred, something like that, so maybe you can help your teammates. And also, of course, this is assuming you'd use Meg as the starter character, so I hope that maybe gave enough insight into perks. And with that being said, I think I can finally get into actual real examples of chases. After I did this, I suddenly realised that I should probably actually prove a point, shouldn't I? I should actually use the build I said I would if I started the game now. To start off with, as you can see right now, I'm actually having to get the perks, which I haven't gotten the character yet. So, funnily enough, there's another thing I can show here. As you can see from me loading into my first match here, it actually says the unknown there at the bottom. That's to tell me who the killer is that I'm about to go against. Now, normally it wouldn't say that, but because I haven't played in so long, I haven't played against this killer many times, if any at all, and I believe for the first 3 times you go against a certain killer, it does warn you of who the killer is there. Something important about Dead by Daylight is of course knowing what the killer can do. I know how this killer works just because I have the killer myself. I may have not played against it, but I do know how it works because I've played as it. There's a few things we can guess from what's going on right now. You can see that I'm on a generator, someone's on hook, someone's being chased, and someone doesn't look like they're doing much. And so it can be assumed that the person who looks like they're doing nothing is probably going to save the person who's been hurt. And it indeed is what happens. I'm sticking to the generator. The killer's in the process of hooking someone right now, meaning they can't do anything about the fact I'm on a generator. That being said, they know I'm on a generator here, they can hear the generator from there. They're also very close, they're for sure going to be over here. And they then start chasing me. Now, I dropped the pallet there, that is the best move to do in that situation, of course. However, I'm in a bad situation, and I actually got a weird hit there. I'm kind of surprised I actually got knocked down because of that. Now, as we see on Hook, we can see the auras of every survivor here. It's a very nice way to work out what everyone's actually doing right now. So as we can see, 2 people are healing up over there, another person's in chase. Now here, someone's been knocked down, they're about to get hooked. So 2 people are running. The ideal would be for both of them to go for different unhooks, so that the killer no longer has pressure. Now this then goes really unfortunately. The killer was nearby where I was being unhooked, so they instantly knocked down the one who saved me, and they then go for me. I'm not really sure what the killer was thinking when they went up there, but luckily it meant I could get away for now. And now that someone's been hit by their ability, I could then go on and do a generator or get healed up. Now, that was the plan anyway. Then the killer found me again. You may be wondering why on earth I was just stood there for a bit. That's because I wasn't sure of where the kill actually was. So it could have been that they were about to appear where I was going towards. So that's why I had to check for a second to see that the killer was indeed going the way I was hoping for it to go. That way I could get back to the pallet and continue looping. Try not to be any of these survivors you're seeing right now. As you're about to see after I get unhooked here, the killer is actually nearby. Given the direction they're coming from, it can be assumed that Jake there probably could see the killer. And also the person you see vaulting up there is not near the killer. Now, during this entire time I was hooked, no one was in chase either. Now, one thing I should also mention, of course, is this is solo queue, right? There's no communication between the survivors. There's no way I can actually tell them to go do generators. However, that is the main thing we want right now as a team. I'm hooked. This person right here is about to save me. Sure, the killer's about to appear, so the person saving me is probably about to be chased. However, that person stood there, and that person vaulting are doing nothing for the team. It's usually not the end of the world, even if time like this is wasted. However, no one is doing gens right now, and that's the main thing we'd want. Because the main reason why a killer might go for someone else right now, while this person's unhooking me, is because they're about to get a generator done. You know, especially since there's only 2 left. However, the killer's gone straight back to where we are. We're the only ones technically doing anything right now, meaning he's effectively put pressure on the entire team by going back to us. So of course I don't mean any offense to the people I played with or mean to blame teammates in just for something like this. All I'm trying to get at in this situation, I know it's a very specific one as well. Try not to be one of those 2 survivors. And there the last gen is done. And my hope perk is active now. One of the ones I mentioned earlier, if you remember. Now I messed up here. I accidentally turned on one of the lights at the exit gate there. That wasn't the plan at all. Once you progress enough on an exit gate, their lights will then turn on. However, if you progress it just enough before a certain point, it won't turn on any of the lights. I didn't see the other gates open, however, the killer's right there to stop me. I now know I'm going to be the target. I'm injured. I'm an easy one to knock down. All gates are open. However, I get saved by the teammates here. They both body block the killer, and because of that, all 3 of us then escape, leaving the first match kind of a success. Now the next match is against a killer I haven't played against for ages. And also, as you can see that I'm trying to show, the offerings there, we have 2 things in fact. First one, that green offering you see there was to bring us to a specific map. For some reason one of the survivors wanted this map. But more importantly, what I was trying to show here was the killer brought an offering that we can't see. Now that can mean 2 things. One, it can mean they brought one based on where the survivors will spawn. But more likely, which it turned out to be, was a Mori. Now a Mori is one of the only ways the killer can kill a survivor without hooking them. Instead of picking up someone to then hook them for the final time, they could instead start this animation where they just kill the survivor. Because it's only for the final hook stage, it's not as if they can kill you any sooner. It just means that once they've knocked you down and can Mori you, they don't have to take you to a hook instead. Now here I was actually the first one to get chased by the killer. Unfortunately, I play very badly for this. I mean, don't get me wrong, this first chase goes on for a fair bit of time, I'd say. But it wasn't a particularly good chase, and I died in a really silly way. So as you can see, my screen looks a bit different. This is what you have when you're against Freddy, where you're actually asleep. And when you're asleep, depending on what the player brought, there are 2 things they could have had. They either have it, so there are fake pallets, or they just have these blood-stained things on the ground, which slow you down when you go through them. They are things that the killer personally puts down. In this case, it's a pallet Freddy, meaning they had fake pallets. And I indeed died because I dropped down a fake pallet, as you can see here. I was not expecting it because the default Freddy is the one that has the bloodstains on the ground instead. Pallet Freddy isn't as popular. The killer actually goes for me again. Now the Steve here actually caught on to what was happening and he was very nice to take a hit for me. Unfortunately that actually resulted in him getting hooked instead though. After unhooking the killer, they meant for me again. I already knew they put down a fake pallet right there, so I knew not to drop it. That would just be stupid. So instead I went to what I assumed wouldn't have been a fake pallet, because I doubt Freddy was here before, and luckily I was correct. I then went back over to Shack. Unfortunately, this one actually ends up being the reverse of what I was mentioning before, when instead you vault the window the other way. Then after that, I went back to the other loop here. Now there's a window here, so I know there's a pallet somewhere as well. If I didn't mess up, that is. However, I then get pallet saved. So yeah, I've got to say, Steve is the actual MVP in this match. Thanks to Spine Chill a tiny bit, I guess, I know that the killer's still going for me. So I take him all the way to the other side of the map where I know no one is. And I instead take him around a very typical loop. Now luckily I do keep him distracted here for quite a while. I even do some crazy plays which I wouldn't recommend doing against a person normally. It only worked out due to sheer luck. I was a bit unlucky here, there was no pallet here. On the bright side though, me keeping him distracted the entire time lets the final gen get done. If I had adrenaline in this situation, I would have actually gotten back up. And unfortunately enough, basement was in the main building this time round. So basement, which I don't think I'd mentioned yet, can either spawn in main building or shack. If there isn't one of those, like if it's an indoor building, there will be 2 other spawns instead that it could be in. And for basement, as you can see, there's 4 hooks. There's a few lockers, but it's not a place you want to be really. Now, I was very lucky to have these kind of teammates. I got saved at the very last second. However, I end up feeling quite bad for what happens afterwards, because while I end up getting out, one of my teammates unfortunately doesn't. And there we go, those are the 2 games I played with that build. Alright, so the original plan was to show a bunch of clips of Survivor like this one, and just go through, you know, a few other tips and tricks for looping, all of that kind of stuff. As I'm saying this as well, I've kind of realised that being in a chase is just one of the main things left that I need to talk about, to be honest. And it's for very specific loops, I'd say. Kind of like how I went into more detail about Shack before. I feel like that is just the main focus now. And because of that, I think instead, I'll now cut this to the killer side of things, and instead at the very end of this video go into specific loops, because the way survivors would loop it are typically the same, assuming they're being optimal. If you're also playing killer, you can then know how to go against them because you'd know how they play around it. Right, now that it's the killer side of this video, we're now going to go back to the tutorial like we did for Survivor and just go through it from the beginning. Funnily enough though, as I'm watching this back, I've kind of just realised that I've just gone through most of this through the Survivor side anyway. The only things which stand out the most to me are just that you can see scratch marks as the killer, and you're also notified if someone does a fast action. But apart from that, there doesn't actually seem to be anything else, to be honest. So with that being said, I think I'll just go into the tutorial game against bots. That certainly made things easier anyway. For this match, I'm going to both try and give some tips and tricks, just as killer in general, and also I will just explain how Trapper works, given that he is a very simple killer. That explosion at the generator there in Shack tells me that a survivor just failed a skill check. Also, you may be noticing I've been putting these traps down that I've been picking up. Now, one place I would actually just recommend in general for putting a trap is where I put it here, where it's at the corner of Shack. Because if you were watching earlier when I was playing Survivor, I was saying about the Killer Shack loop, where normally you go round that part. Alright, so at this point I have two people hooked. Jake here just got unhooked, and a generator also just got done. So, in that situation, no one is on a gen right now, because that one was just finished. Since we know two people were on hook, that must have meant that someone would have been unhooked, because it was very unlikely they unhooked themselves. And since a generator just got done, that means someone was also on a generator, meaning the only thing that was happening now is that people are probably healing up while I'm chasing this Meg here. If you wanted to really put pressure on the team, it could be best to pressure the three who were healing up, because you'd only be leaving one survivor to do a generator possibly. Again, as I'm hooking this person here, we see that Dwight just got unhooked, meaning that someone would have unhooked the Dwight and only one person's on a generator again. Since the Claudette's here, we can probably guess that the Meg is the only one possibly doing a generator. But overall for this match, it's kind of hard to really give examples of what's really going on right now because this is just against bots. So because of that, I'll just go into Trapper a bit more instead for the rest of this match. So, personally, I haven't played much of Trapper. I've played him enough to be able to get the Adept achievement on him, so at the very least I have played well enough to get a good match as him. But out of all the starter killers, he's probably the one I'm least experienced on. Now here as I'm chasing the Jake, I kind of stopped there because I was hoping the Jake would just run into the trap there. Unfortunately didn't happen, but that trap there for example would actually normally be a good one. Because as you can see here, there are actually two windows in this looping area, meaning a survivor would have quite a high chance of possibly walking to that trap. Now, if you're not too sure, especially if you don't know the map well, or if you haven't played enough Killer to really understand how the survivors play yet, you can also do what you see me do here, where I literally just put them at windows and pallets. That way, if the survivor wants to go around that loop, they have to either completely avoid it because there's a trap there, waste time trying to disarm the trap to then use the loop, or be lucky enough for you to have put it in a place where they can just about dodge it somehow. But that being said, even if the survivor doesn't get caught by that trap, just from the trap being at that loop can make it easier to loop the survivors sometimes. And also just from playing against Trapper as well, naturally as a survivor I do tend to look at the ground a lot more for traps, meaning that in some cases I've actually then played really badly against him in chase because I'm too worried about where traps might be to then really worry about where he is. And with that being said, I'm now just going to go back into going through all the starter characters, going through perks, all of that stuff, just like how I did for Survivor. Okay, so things are a bit different for this section compared to how it was for Survivors, because there's killers I'd recommend starting off using, and then there's ones that I'd recommend leveling up for the perks. So to start off with, I'm sure you all know what Trapper does by now. Now, Wraith. His ability is where he basically gets out a bell, which lets him cloak and uncloak. When he's cloaked, he's kind of invisible. He can be seen very slightly. Now, as you can see in description, it does mean that when he's cloaked, so invisible, he also goes a bit faster and he'll be undetectable. That's a very valuable part of his ability. Undetectable means the survivors can't see your aura, so if they have a certain perk or anything like that, they won't be able to see you. And they won't hear the terror radius, meaning Wraith can quite literally go up to a survivor while invisible, and unless the survivors are looking out for them, they will not know that the Wraith is right there, apart from very slight sounds that the Wraith makes when nearby. So he can kick generators, he can break pallets, break walls, all of that stuff while invisible, but he cannot attack. And just like the Trapper, he has the default killer speed, default terror radius, and if you couldn't tell, he's tall. Next up, Hillbilly, or as most of us say, Hillbilly. To put it very simply, when he uses his ability, so revs up a chainsaw, he goes really fast at the cost of the turning being very slow. However, while he's using his chainsaw, he can instantly down survivors, meaning that unless a survivor has endurance, which would be from a very specific situation like being unhooked, they will be instantly down, so that's even if they're healthy. And also, the same stuff here. And if you couldn't tell, he's Tool. Now, Nurse. Her ability is actually really powerful, but quite hard to use. She basically gets her hand out, she'll make a sound so survivors will know, and based on how long she charges up that ability, the further she'll go. There is of course a limit to how far, and this includes going through walls, all of that stuff, hence why she's really powerful. Now, there are downsides to this killer as well, notably the only killer as well to go slower than a survivor. No way, we finally have a killer who is not Tool. They're average. Now, Huntress is quite simple. You have these hatchets, you throw them. Get more hatchets by going to the lockers. When you get out a hatchet, if you hold it for a bit longer, you can also charge it up so it goes very fast. And also, the hatchet will always be in the centre of the screen. You don't have a crosshair or anything, so it can be quite hard to get good at. She goes slightly slower than the average killer. She has a smaller terror radius. And surprise, surprise, she is Tool. Now, as I said before, if you have Feng and Ace, I believe, for free, so that would be if you're on console, you would also have Hag and Doctor. Hag basically puts down traps, a bit like Trapper. However, when the survivor goes to them, she teleports to them. And then Doctor basically makes people scream. I don't know how else to put it. I'm not going to focus as much on these two just because that's not what everyone gets at the beginning. So out of these 5 killers, I would recommend Wraith. Oh dear, I did it again, didn't I? I waffled. Right, let's put it simply here. Traps, hard to use. Wouldn't recommend. Wraith, very simple, beginner friendly. Billy, hard to use. Nurse, hard to use. Huntress, even if you've played a lot of shooters, all of that stuff, still hard to use and to get used to at the beginning, so I would not recommend either. That being said though, if you do have Doctor unlocked, he is also a fairly beginner friendly killer too, so maybe that one as well if you want. But to start off with, to understand how the game is, you know, all of that stuff, Wraith. Now, for perks, I already know when I went through this on the survivor side, I took way too long, so I'm really going to try and summarize here. Faster while carrying a survivor. Break pallets, walls, gens faster. This is a very good one. Survivors get skill checks more often when they're within your terror radius, meaning it's a good perk with a killer like Doctor. Quite bad, but for the most part, again, as you get better, you won't want this one really. Now this perk isn't really that good. When you get stunned by a pallet, your recovery is much quicker. You can't get blinded, and you see anyone who tries doing it. This only happens once per generator, but when it reaches 70% progress, you are notified about it, and you're undetectable. The main part about this one is the pairing is slower for each survivor that's not healthy. Quite good on Plague, Legion, those kind of killers that injure you. This one lets you see survivors who are healing nearby. It's very good on Pyramid Head. Survivors are louder, to put it simply. It's basically only used on Spirit. Now, I forgot to mention what Bloodlust is here. If you're chasing the survivor for long enough and you don't break pallets or hit them, do any of that. So in other words, if you're getting absolutely rolled by a survivor, usually get a speed up. And I think this goes up to tier 3, which makes you go really fast, basically. However, this basically means you're undetectable instead of getting Bloodlust. I wouldn't recommend it. Now this one's actually a Hex perk, which is something I think I mentioned earlier anyway. There are these totems around the map. I believe it's 5 in total. And this perk will mean that one of these totems will instead be lit up. And if a survivor cleanses this totem, this perk will then be disabled for the rest of the game. And this one means that each time you hook a survivor, you get a token. In other words, hooking 5 survivors means that survivors no longer get the sound to say that they have a skill check. Again, another perk that goes very well with Doctor. Also quite good with this perk. And finally this one, which shows you survivors when they go into the basement. If the survivors have a perk related to going to the basement, this could actually help very well. But very situational, survivors don't tend to go in basement. It actually makes it hard to recommend which ones to level up. Actually, Billy, to be honest, because he has the one that makes pallet styles quick. This one can be useful as a new player, and also this one, which literally tells you when people on generators. So yeah, now that I think about it, I'd recommend leveling up Billy, because his 3 perks are especially nice for beginners. Surprise, surprise, I forgot to mention the general killer perks like I did for Survivor. So to make this part a bit quicker, here are all of the perks. I'd say Bitter Murmur is good. Deer Stalker, not that good. Distressing can be good if you need your terror radius to be bigger, depending on the killer you use or other perks you have. Noed, No One Escapes Death, as it's actually called, is very good. It does get a lot of hate, naturally, because everyone's literally one-shot once all the gens are done. Thrill of the Hunt, I suppose it goes well with Hex perks. Insidious, not good. Iron Grasp can be okay, depending on what build you've got. Monstrous Shrine. This one used to be bad, and I'd say it's still quite bad now. Shattered Hope is very situational, so if you do happen to get survivors with boon totems, it can really help. Sloppy Butcher, a really good perk. Spies from the Shadows, especially as a new player, that's quite a good perk. Unrelenting, I guess it can be good for beginners, but overall not too great. And then Whispers, again a very good perk. So as a recap, the ones which I think are best are Bitter Murmur, Noed, Sloppy Butcher, and Whispers. Actually, before I show a bit of the gameplay for each of those killers, I will quickly just go through the other killers, because this will help you for both survivor and killer side, because you'll know what the killer does if you're up against it, and also if you happen to have the killer, maybe some stuff you can do. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you would recognise who this is, Michael Myers from Halloween. Your ability is where you stalk people. As you stalk these survivors, you go up these evil within tiers. So you start at tier 1, when you then get to tier 2 from stalking, you basically become a regular killer at this point. And then when you stalk even more at tier 3, you have a minute where you one-shot survivors, which is what exposed means. After that minute's gone, you go back to tier 2. Then we've got the cannibal. Most people just say Bubba though. I'm not actually sure why, to be honest. But to put it simply, he's a very easy version of Billy. He doesn't get the crazy speed boost that Billy does. Instead, he basically swings his chainsaw around. Then we've got Freddy. He also has the ability to teleport to generators. Survivors will know this because blood will be coming out of the generator. Right, the pig. She has the ability to crouch. While she's crouched, she goes slower, but she's undetectable. Also, while she's crouched, she can start this charged attack, as it says it's called an ambush there, where she kind of does something a bit similar to Billy, I guess you could say. She just suddenly goes really fast. And also, when she knocks down survivors, she can put traps on their heads. To put it simply, if the survivors don't get the traps off, they'll die. Clown has these bottles. He can change between 2 types. A purple one, which will slow down survivors and make them scream, and a yellow one, which speeds up himself and any survivor that goes into it. The spirit, she can go really fast, however she can't see survivors. They also can't see her though. She has to work out where they are based on scratch marks, basically. She also goes the same speed as Huntress and has a smaller terror radius than most. Legion has an ability where they go really fast and then they hit a survivor while they're in that frenzy. Then they're showed where the other survivors are with something called Killer Instinct, where it's kind of like a heartbeat almost. If they hit a survivor while in this frenzy, they put them into deep wound, which means they're injured, and there's this bar on them which if they don't get rid of, they'll actually get knocked down as well. The frenzy, however, can't knock down survivors until the 5th hit, I believe, which basically means they have to hit all 4 survivors and then hit another one again. That being said, you could just hit 4 survivors and then hit the last one you just hit again, and that would knock them. Also, while in this frenzy, they can vault pallets. Plague vomits onto stuff. If people get ill enough, to put it simply, they'll then be broken, which means they can't heal. so they'll also be injured when they're broken. The only way they can get rid of this state is by cleansing at these pools that will be around the map. At any pool that the survivor uses to cleanse, that pool will then be red, and if the plague goes up to that pool, her vomit then turns into this like red vomit instead, which can injure and then knock survivors instead. Ghostface is a bit like Myers. He can stalk survivors. He makes the survivor he's stalking exposed if he does it for long enough, meaning that they'll then be one shot. Also, when he goes into his stalking mode, he's undetectable, and he can also crouch. Demogorgon, he has two abilities. He can do this shred where he leaps forward. The survivors will know when he does it because his mouth opens up, and he can also put down portals which he can teleport between. And once he's teleported between one of these portals, the survivors can get rid of them, but he'll know when they're nearby them. The Oni, or Oni, however you say it, when survivors are injured, they'll be dropping these things called blood orbs. When he collects enough blood orbs, he can then go into a Fury, where I think it's for like a minute or something. He has an ability similar to Billy, where he goes really fast but slow turning. But in that Blood Fury, he is a lot more powerful than Billy's chainsaw, since he can do a regular attack instead of a dash, which also insta-downs. Death Slinger is Huntress, but instead of hatchets, it's a gun that reels in survivors. Pyramid Head is the killer I mean. Puts his sword into the ground. When he walks with the sword in the ground, leaves behind like barbed wire. And also while he's doing that, he can send this thing across the ground almost, which can also hit through walls. Also, any survivors that have gone through that barbed wire stuff then get tormented, meaning instead of getting hooked, they can actually get sent to a cage instead, which saves the time of picking up the survivor. Blight does these rushes, a bit like Billy, where it's fast speed but slow turn rate kind of thing. That's all really. Twins, you play as the big cat you see there, but you can also play as this little baby thing there. Trickster is just rapid fire Huntress. Nemesis is a bit like Pyramid Head with the attacks he does, however they don't go through walls. But that being said, he also gets zombies to help him. Pinhead gets out this chain thing, and from that chain, he can send a chain at survivors, but it's hard to control. He also has this box that survivors need to get to, otherwise killer will be even more powerful. But that being said, if the killer gets the box first, he'll know where the survivors are and there'll be chains attacking the survivors. Artist can put these crows down, and then once they're down, she can choose to fire them whenever. If there's survivors near the crows, the killer will know, and if they get hit, she'll know. If they're right next to the crow when they were sent flying, they'll get injured and then downed if they were already injured. Onryo has a bit of a similar ability to Wraith, where she kind of goes undetectable kind of thing. However, instead of being invisible, she's just like flickering almost. And while she's demanifested, so cloaked if it was Wraith, she can teleport to TVs, which are typically by generators. Also, from certain things, survivors can get condemned, and if they reach the max condemned state, whatever it's called, fully condemned, they can actually just get killed once they're knocked down. A bit like a Mori, but it doesn't matter how many times they've been hooked. Really simple way to describe Dredge would be that he can teleport to lockers, and at certain points in the match, the screen goes really dark for survivors, like they can hardly see a thing, and the killer's undetectable. Wesker is kind of like a weaker version of Nurse almost. He does something similar to the Demogorgon Shred, where he leaps forward, but he can also vault over pallets or windows if he does it towards that. The Knight can basically put down guards which will patrol wherever he put them, and he has 3 different types of guards which are good at different things. These guards can also then chase the survivors, meaning the Knight could chase someone while another guard's chasing another kind of thing. Skull Merchant puts down drones. Survivors can get detected by these drones, they can even get exposed at some point. Killers undetectable when they're nearby the drone, all sorts of stuff. Singularity puts down these biopods around the map, and they can look through them as if it's like a CCTV camera almost, and put something on the survivors. If they then do the same thing again with the biopod on that survivor, they can teleport to them, or they can also, with the same way they put down a biopod, teleport to the survivor if they're right next to them. And once they've teleported, they're very powerful. There's Xenomorph has these things around the map, which means he can go underground to go between each of them. Kind of a bit like Demogorgon, but they've already been put there. He also goes into a mode where he's on all fours, I'm pretty sure, and he does like a tail attack thing. It's very powerful, and the only way to counter it is by the survivors getting out these flame turrets. Chucky can go undetectable, and during that time he can do this like rush attack. Also during this rush, he can go under pallets and over windows. There are also fake sounds of footprints and other stuff, so survivors might sometimes think he's there when he's not. The Unknown, that was another killer I played against earlier. And then Vecna, who I haven't got, basically has 4 abilities, as you can see here. There are ways to counter it. To be honest, I'm not actually too sure myself, so just gonna have to read what it says here. Also, the upcoming killer, Dracula. I believe he can do an attack similar to Pyramid Head, but it's not as powerful. He can also turn into a wolf, which I think can speed up if it's nearby survivors, something like that, and can do something similar to Wesker. And then could also turn into a bat, which is a bit like Spirit, where they can't see survivors. While in this bat mode, they can teleport to windows and pallets, I'm pretty sure. But that killer still isn't out yet, so not completely sure yet. And that is all of them. So with that being said, let's get into some real game situations. I'll go through the starter killers again, give a bit more of a guide on how to use them. Right, so for Wraith, this game did end up going well for me, but I played so badly throughout the entire game for some reason. So the perk at the top there, as you can see, the pallet just broke. So when I hit a survivor, after a few seconds that will be up for a bit, and that just means that anyone who fast vaults over pallets will instantly break them for me. The perk to the left means when I kick generators, the aggression is much greater. The generator will also then be yellow. Any survivor who hits a skill check will actually make a notification on that gen for me, so I'll know if they're on it again. The perk on the right means that any gen I kick actually reveals the aura of any survivors nearby. And then the bottom perk lets me see survivors when I hook someone. Now this map has a lot of pallets, so my perk for the pallets to be instantly broken actually helps quite a lot for this one. Now for some reason here, as I get stunned, I messed it up really badly. The tactic with Wraith in that situation is to body block them from trying to get to the pallet while you're uncloaking. It looked like he managed to just about get past me. Hence why I said earlier I played really bad this match. Anyway, the main tips I give for Wraith are to try and stop the survivors from vaulting windows or pallets while you're uncloaking, if you can. And also, if you're in a situation where they're at an unsafe loop, maybe be in a situation where you can hit them if they were about to vault the pallet or window. As you see here, this Steve looked like they played really badly because they didn't drop the pallet. I made it look like I was about to go to the left, meaning that the Steve was then going to go round to the right of me. However, I then made a quick turn so I could then hit him. Now, a survivor who's very careful would stay closer to the pallet and manage to react in time so they drop the pallet without getting hit. However, that is the kind of mind games you'll probably want to pull off as killer, because they go off by the red stain if they can't see you properly. Meaning that it can be very easy to fake them out into making them think you're about to go one way when you're going to go the opposite way. Anyway, overall just for this match, there wasn't really much I could say, to be honest. The other thing is, at this loop here you see, this is where you should break that pallet if it's been dropped. Reason why I didn't is because if they think they're safe by vaulting it, it's an easy hit for me. Because if instead I went to break the pallet, they would then have time to run off. Again, at this loop, I kind of tried faking it a bit. He then thought I was going to double back, which led him to not vault in that pallet, let me get a hit. So again, mind games do really matter, and I'll try and get into it a bit more later on. Alright, so I just killed the third survivor, meaning there's one survivor left. Hatch is open now, and just as a side note for this map, Hatch only spawns at the bottom here, as you see me close it there. It never spawns upstairs. Right, now we've got a Hillbilly game. So, I've got quite a nice map, very nice outdoor one. That's the kind of thing you want for Billy. Indoors are the worst. Now, while this is going on, I'll quickly explain a few things. So, the add-ons, which I don't think I've really mentioned before, are basically things that affect Killer's ability some way or another. And I think this is probably quite important to bring up because the way Billy works for me is different to default Billy, because this one means I have about, I think it's a 20% speed boost when I use the chainsaw. However, it adds a much slower charge up time to be able to then do the chainsaw sprint. Also, for the perks, I have the top one there being one of the default killer perks. You see the auras of survivors who are near a generator that's just been completed. I've then got the perk on the right, which is the same one I had on Wraith. Generators regress so much more when you kick them. My perk on the left, which again regresses gens like crazy. And then the bottom perk again is where you see survivors. So, like I said, Billy is a very hard killer to use. And sure, I might be making him look fairly easy. That is just because I've played him quite a lot now. If you ever do want to try and get good at Billy, it's trying to learn how to do curves. Like I said before, Billy's turning is very slow. However, it is very fast for the first, I'd say 2 seconds or so, maybe even just 1 second. And during that time, you have the opportunity to go round the bend, and that is basically what we call Billy curves. It can be quite hard to get used to. However, if you can pull it off, it makes Billy that much better. Also, another thing I forgot to mention for Billy's ability is fairly recently, maybe a few months ago now, he got buffed, and sometimes you'll notice at the bottom left there where it shows his ability, there's a progress bar, and sometimes it'll go red. During that time, Billy goes even faster for his chainsaw. And also his charge up, all of that stuff is much faster. Something which can really catch survivors off guard is when you're in that mode. But with all of that being said, the main thing about Billy is you want to learn how to curve at him if you want to get very good at him. So back onto the curves. This one here, I suppose you could call that a curve. It was me going around that rock there. However, the main kind of curve I'm talking about is this.
I've got her here though, unless you rolled it.
Or this. Oh my god, that's nasty. That is nasty. Right, so, assuming I can magically put this in somewhere, thanks to, myself, I can quickly show how Billy curves look to both the killer point of view and survivor. So this is the very typical one, this kind of car. It's on the Badham preschool map. So typically, let's say I started here, so the chainsaw started there. I would then, during the time I get the really fast turn rate, I'd go around this part, allow me to then hit them here. This is assuming that Dwight here is about here and is trying to run that way. And also assuming that the pallet is magically not there. I mean, we could just assume they're on the other side of this as well. Something like that, right? If I go here. Boom. That's it, really. I don't know how else to put it, to be honest. Also, those crows there are a sign of someone being AFK. When there's 3 of them, the killer is typically notified that the survivor is there. Now for Nurse, another killer, which I think is really hard to use. For this, it's literally going to be a 2v8 game from, if you saw it, when I played it with Trog. Because I haven't played the regular game of Nurse in ages, and I probably wouldn't do too well. Not to mention as well that the lobbies are very competitive when I play as Nurse for some reason, so I'd rather not have to go through that. My MMRs was kind of crazy when I played as Nurse before, I'm pretty sure. However, back in the day, cut this. I'm about to give them a history lesson now. Don't worry, already on the job. So because of that, I thought I'd just use the same footage from before. Now, there isn't much I can really say about Nurse. To be honest, it's just something you get good at after playing enough of it. The only things I should mention, to be honest, are just that, first of all, there are many times when, if you try and use her blink, it will go into nothing, like here. And that's because I didn't charge up her ability long enough. So there are times like that where it doesn't happen. Also, for most survivors, if you're against a new player, they will literally go where you expect them to go. If they're moving along a wall, they'll probably still run along that wall if you're trying to teleport to them. If you go against more experienced survivors, they'll start doing what I do here, for example, where they'll first go wherever you expect them to go, but then usually they'll go the opposite direction or go somewhere completely random. And that can be the main thing that gets tricky as Nurse. It's trying to work out where to actually blink to hit the survivor. But again, like I said, with time, you'll get good at it, I'm sure you will. And apart from that, I guess the only other thing I should say is for her things like add-ons and perks. All the reading perks are very good on her. Something like her personal perk, Nurse's Call-In. Once people are healing, you literally can see them, so it's very easy to then teleport on them. Also for things like add-ons, maybe just fatigue-related ones. Anything related to recharge time, that kind of stuff, I wouldn't recommend. Most of the time, if you play well as her especially, you tend to not actually need the charges because by the time you hit a survivor, you tend to get most of your charges back anyway. With that being said, I think that's about it for Nurse. Now, finally we've got Huntress, another killer which is most ideal when outdoors. For an indoor map, killers like Billy and Huntress tend to be much worse. Anyway, like I said earlier, Huntress is very simple. She is quite hard to get good at because you have no crosshair, as you can see right now. Just have to go off the center of the screen. Because as you can see here, if I put a dot in the middle of the screen, the hatchet literally goes there. So I don't actually use any add-ons on Huntress. Things like decreased charge up time, whatever it's called, so like something where you can get out that hatchet faster, and things like movement speed when you have the hatchet out, that kind of stuff. Those are probably the best add-ons, to be honest. She actually got birthed? She actually got buffed fairly recently, maybe a few months ago now, where she actually now has 7 hatchets because she used to have 5. Meaning that for add-ons where you get more hatchets, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them because you already have quite a lot of hatchets as it is. Now for perks, again, you might notice a few of the same ones at this point. Got Bitter Murmur, which is perk on the left where you can see survivors nearby, a generator that's just been completed. And also the perk at the bottom, Barbecue and Chili, where you see survivors when they've been hooked. For the perk at the top, it means you open lockers faster, and survivors that get out of lockers are then exposed for a bit. And then the perk on the right is actually one I only started using very recently. It used to be Nurse's Call-In, but then I realised it wasn't actually so useful in Huntress. So instead I changed it to you open a locker, you see any survivors near a locker. So given what my build is and everything, I'm sure you can probably guess that the main focus is to be able to see where survivors are. For tips as Huntress, one of the things I would recommend watching out for is that a lot of survivors, when they see you're aiming at them, especially if they're out in the open, they'll usually do some weird, like, zigzaggy movement. For that, I would recommend, first of all, having your hatchet fully charged up, so that's when it makes the extra sound, and you throw it as fast as you possibly can. And secondly, quite a lot of these survivors tend to first of all do a little dodge, and just assume you'd have thrown the hatchet at that point. So sometimes you can quite literally wait out the dodge and then just hit them when they run normally. Another thing is that around very basic loops, survivors do sometimes try and bait you into getting out your hatchets. So as you can see here when I'm playing Survivor, I go around this loop, and of course because Survivors, when you're close to them, would normally drop a pallet, your first thought would normally be to then get out the hatchet, to then hit them when they drop the pallet. However, as you see me do here, I keep on making them think I'm about to do it, and it results in them completely slowing down. They then have to either take down the hatchet to try and catch up again, or hope that they can somehow keep their hatchet up and somehow get a sneaky shot on me around the loop. But of course, because having a hatchet out slows you down, it's very easy to then just loop the Huntress while they have it out. So in other words, for loops like that, quite a lot of the time you might just have to wait for them to drop the pallet. Not even get out your hatchet when you think they're about to do it. Literally just, if you're able to get a regular hit on them with your weapon, or just wait for them to drop the pallet, break the pallet and move on. Because anything else will probably just be giving the survivors more time to do generators. With all of that being said, I think it's time to get into just general killer tips. Right, so Cold Tower is probably the best map to do for this, since it's the most balanced for Killer and Survivor. Okay, so here we have a very typical loop. There's a window there and a pallet there. Let's say you just came from Shack, so you'd be running through here maybe, and the killer is right here chasing you. You've gone around here. Now, in this situation, the killer might go around this way to then hit you, assuming you're about to vault. That being said, if you think they're about to do that, you'd instead, as they're going around, go this way. So when you're at this kind of point, they would probably be around here. Now, I suppose they could choose to go around this way, if you then choose to get to this pallet. However, if they then do that, you can then of course go this way. That being said, what would be most likely is when they've reached that point, you'd already be around here, because going around this is much quicker than the killer having to go around the entire loop. So once you're at this pallet, you can just go back around here. Now, a killer, seeing you do that, could choose to go around this way to cut you off. In which case, of course, you just want to go around this way instead. But what's very typical is they'll then follow you around here, allowing you to possibly get to the window. So there's a lot to this one loop, as you can probably tell, because if they then try and follow you up behind, you can then try and hope to get to the pallet. And there are a few other things around this kind of loop, but that is just the general idea for this one. Likewise, if they were over here and you're at this window, if you see them going inwards here, you just wait at the window. If you see them trying to go around, you vault. Although of course you have to do a bit of a mind game because you're going under the assumption they're going to continue. Fine Cloak is the killer here. You can just about see a red stain there. But up until about this point, you can't see unless you get really close there, at which point you won't be able to vault in time. So if the killer's there again, they go around. If they choose to stop at around this point, and you're vaulting, you won't be able to vault in time for that, and they'll beat you to this pallet over here. So it's a very tricky mind game that you have to pull off if you're in that situation in particular. Already done a shack multiple times, so I don't think that's really necessary. This kind of loop is just you going around this, killer then follows you. If they go the other way, you then double back like this, and just goes on. Do not go around this way, because they can swing. Especially if it was Wraith here, they can probably go from here, uncloak, and then try mind game around the pallet. But the second you drop this pallet, and it's on this end that the killer's at, then they can easily get to you. If the killer was from this kind of direction, then the best thing to do would be either to go to Shack, which is conveniently here, like just another loop, or go around this way, so that if they try going around to meet you there, you can then just go around the other way, and you turn this into an actual loop, which you can go around a few times possibly. Although that being said, if they're close to you, then it might only be one. This is another very typical loop. Also, something I did notice which I forgot to mention, it's not very important because Wraiths tend to not do this in a game realistically. You can see the outline of Wraith, just a bit, can't you, when they're cloaked. However, if they stand still, they actually go completely invisible. And also, as you can see here, I am turning around as Wraith, and on Survivor side you can't see that. Anyway, for this loop, it's actually a bit similar to the one I was just going through earlier, except more dangerous. Now, the best thing you want is for the killer to be around here, as a survivor. Because when they're here, if they go around that way, you'll know straight away. And the killer, as you can see, can't actually see the survivor in that position. If the killer tries going around the other way, you can clearly react to it at that point. However, it's another story when it's on this side. From this point, for example, especially if the killer did something like moonwalking, look at this. Wraith could possibly hit you if you're stood there and you don't react in time. Likewise, if you're stood on the other side, you might arguably have a bit more reaction time, possibly, but again, it's nowhere near as nice as if the killer's on the other side over here. Now, there's a few loops like this. I mean, this car here is very specific, but in general, there are quite a few loops where you're going around one thing with the pallet there. Now, you can of course go around it. Killer then follows you. And for the sake of this one, I will actually drop the pallet this time. let's say you dropped it as the killer was about to get you here. Of course, the killer could break it there, and you could just run to another loop. Maybe go around this main building and hope there's a loop down there. However, if they don't break it, especially in this kind of setup of the map, they could go around, assuming you run off, and easily hit you. So what you kind of have to do in this situation is stay by that pallet until they break it, or you get some kind of getaway somehow. And in that situation, what the killer would do, let's say they're about here, so around halfway. If they went around, you'd of course have to vault. If they only go a bit, and you vault, it's a bit hard doing this because I'm controlling both characters, of course. But they could possibly go round to your side as you're vaulting it, because it's quite a small loop. Anyway, as I've been saying all this, there is something I've realised, which is that I think I have been a bit more survivor-sided when I've been explaining how to loop certain things. So over there again, as you can probably guess, the point for killer is you kind of just want to do the opposite of what I'm recommending for survivor. So over at that loop again, as you could see, the ideal for killer is to be in this shorter side of the loop, and then maybe moonwalk to the pallet where you can then hit. And then for this loop, it can be quite good to actually just not break that pallet straight away and instead try and hit the person as they're trying to vault over the pallet or something like that. In the same way, the survivors can also fake the killer into thinking they're about to vault. So let's say I'm moving like this, it looks like I might be about to vault this. So then the killer, let's say they're in the center here again, they're about to go around. If I think they're about to vault, I'd of course go around this side, but survivor might still be there on the other side. So there are a lot of mind games you can do in that regard as well. Again, a few other simple loops like this one. It's quite a risky one. Depending on the killer, this is a very dangerous one especially. Against a killer like Wraith, it's not too bad because, let's say, they're trying to go around to hit you there. The survivor can already see him on this side. And even on this side, you can still see the blood stain straight away. The only way I can imagine them outplaying you is if they're around here, and so you go this kind of way. You've lost track of them. And then they could suddenly hit you there. So for a killer to get you on this, they basically have to mind game you like that. So if you're killer, try and do that kind of thing if you can. And also, something I did actually forget to mention for Wraith, is that if he uncloaks, there's a delay until you actually see the red stain. Meaning that for Wraith especially, that loop's actually quite good for him. These ones you've probably seen quite a few times now. These are the T&L walls. If for example, we just came from that loop, then vault this window, depending on where the killer goes. Typically speaking, killers do tend to just go around to the outside here. And then we'd see the killer going that way. I mean, also just as a note for killer, that is quite a mind gamey place to be in. If I assume the killer was still moving forward, let's just pretend he is, right? I then go this way, assuming he's about to go that way. If I think it's dangerous to then make it over to that window, which is what you normally would do if they follow you around that way, you can also instead vault this window, but it's a bit dangerous to do. And if you tried doing that, he could then do that. So that is a dangerous one to do. I mean, if it's at the point where you can see the red stain there, and you try vaulting it that way, if you think they've double backed again, it's probably safe to vault again. If you see them then go back here, it's probably safe to then try vaulting it over again. You probably wouldn't get hit. However, there is also the part to consider where if they have the red stain like this, and they do that, look at what it was on the killer side. I didn't move at all. So if I then try vaulting this, surprise. So there are a lot of things like that. For the most part, if they follow you around there, you then want to vault this window, which ideally they would then follow you around this way, and then you can just keep on looping them like this. If after the survivor vaults that way to get to that window, if the killer then goes around that way to try and cut them off so that they can't get to the L wall, survivor can then just go around this way again. If the killer tries cutting them off again, survivor can just do this. And so the only way the killer could get them in that situation would be through some kind of other mind game again. Anyway, I hope I'm not explaining this too badly. Again, another kind of loop here. So we have a window on that side, a pallet there. In fact, I think this is where I died to Freddy before. I mean, of course it was a different map, but I think it was this kind of loop variation, I guess you could say. So again, the typical thing is, if you vault a window, if they go around one of the sides, you go the opposite side, so maybe they're from there. Then, ideally, you'd want to get to a pallet. If on the pallet side, if they go around this way, you want to be careful that they don't catch you off guard and you instead go on that side. However, do bear in mind that if they went round that way, it's very easy for them to then hit you there. Least safe part of this, to be fair, is probably the pallet. Because once they drop that pallet, you can just try and go around and hit them. They'll probably then vault over to this window. If you want to chase them, you want to go around this way. However, like I said, this would then be where the survivor goes around that way to get to pallet again. Alternatively, survivor could go around this way and try and get the vault. But in that case, if you think they're about to do that, you could double back and hit them as they're vaulting. But again, if they think you're about to do that, they could then continue onwards, possibly even drop the pallet that way, letting them do it another way where they then get to window that way. There's a lot of ways survivors can loop stuff. Now, as I was saying about vaulting, if the killer does go around that way, and especially if the pallet has been broken now, and your only chance at getting away from killers by vaulting that window or something like that, if you have enough distance, go around all the way here and try to vault that. Although, you would have to assume that they don't then double back because it's right there. As I say that, it's probably actually a really bad choice to do. If you did want to vault that so that you could maybe go off to that kind of area, you could actually go around this way. If assuming the killer follows you as well, then make the vault there. However, if the killer tries cutting you off there, you'd then have to go around this way, and it would be a bit awkward. You'd have to hope that you can make this vault. And to get a running vault, especially on this one's kind of tricky, you'd have to like do this. You have to do this. You would have to do maybe this? Hold on a second. There we go. That's a bit of a tricky one to pull off. No. There we go. Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I wouldn't recommend trying to do that. We have a pallet here, and then a window all the way over here. Now for this kind of loop, I'm not as certain on these. I mean, I do well in chase at these, but there are a lot of opportunities you have for this. So it's a lot more, you have a lot more freedom, I'd say. Let's say you've just vaulted this window because the killer's after you. You'd then have to watch, like honestly just watch, you can't just run onwards, where the killer goes. So if the killer goes around that way, you'd of course want to go that way. And that is actually probably in this situation what the killer would do. Because if you look at where the window is, that's their closest way of catching up if you stay by the window. So that is very likely to be where they go. So maybe just as a preemptive, maybe go for that direction. And if you do that, you'd then want to go around this way. They might try cutting you off though. If they try doing something like that, you'd be in a very tricky spot. Because if you keep on continuing, the pallet's on their side. From this point you have two situations. So if they're fairly far away, I'd definitely say to go around this way. If the killer actually follows you around especially as well, you could then drop this pallet, and they would then have to follow. They'll probably try and cut you off this way, which is why I wouldn't recommend going for the window in that situation. You'd probably just have to keep on going around this way. If instead, when you're back here though, they try cutting you off around this way, you can then make your way back to the window over here. There we go. If they do something like that, where they cut you off again while you're trying to do this, then just go around this way again, assuming that they follow you. So there's a lot of stuff to this. Alternatively, if you came from this kind of direction, first of all, if they were this close, I wouldn't recommend dropping the pallet because they can literally just go around this. And if they were there, for example, look how tricky that would be. If I stood here, it's kind of hard to get the full view of everything without moving. Now if you go there, you'd be more inclined to go there. That would then invite the moonwalk where they can hit you. If you assume they're about to moonwalk, especially if they did that, surprise, surprise, they're here. That pallet especially is very risky. And so, if you're from here, do you know what I'd recommend? Going around this way. Because if they did follow you along here, and you ran as if you're about to drop the pallet, of course if they're too close, they're gonna hit you. So instead of trying to loop this kind of stuff again, just go to something you're more sure about, like this kind of window. So yeah, you can easily just combine loops together almost. Make a very big loop. And luckily enough, I think this whole map in general just covered the main loops in this game. If you're wondering about things like main building, that's specific for each map. Each main building has a different kind of looping system. It's not as if it's the same inside. This one, Cold Tower in particular, is very basic. It's got these things up here. Some of these are open. Yeah, it's usually one wall closed off. It's never guaranteed which one. And yeah, you literally just fall down. One thing I think is guaranteed is that there is one that you fall down on where there's then a window here. And that's another thing that's also guaranteed, this window. And also breakable walls here. But there's no pallets in this main building. There are a few main buildings that are actually genuine good looping areas, but this one in particular is not too good. Actually, just as something I should probably make clear, this specific building can be bad, like the inside I mean. However, if you combine other stuff around it, it can be good. If we vaulted this window for example, the killers tend to not actually break these walls. If they did, it would be easy for them to get you, to be honest. Especially the way this has been set up here. So if that wall was broken in particular, it's very easy for them to hit you. However, most of the time they actually tend to just vault after you. And if they do that, you can then make your way back over to a loop here, or over there. You could in fact make a really long loop, assuming they don't catch up anyway. But you vault that window, and you go all the way around to this pallet if you remember from earlier. And then, you could even go back to the TNLs over here. Because that's the nice thing about TNLs, by the way. It's not as if there's any pallets, the loop is always the same, regardless, throughout the entire match. You could also try and make your way back to the window again. If this was the window instead, that would be absolutely broken. And just to end this all, there is one thing which I did kind of forget to really talk about, which is that even though I did talk about Shack a fair bit, I didn't really go into detail about what happens if you're on the pallet side. And anyway, it's perfect to end off on this since I started with this as well. So, being in Shack while the killer's around that kind of area is a lot more unsafe. Now, if the killer's actually that far away, your best thing would be to go around here. If the killer then follows you to the middle around here, then you may as well just go around this way and do it the reverse. So you then vault this window and just keep on going. If they're about here though, I'm saying this now, there's no way you can go around this entire thing and then manage to vault that window or something else without them catching up. So in this situation, your only bet is to get this window. Well, I say that, but there's technically two choices. Vault it or fake it. If it looks like the survivors are really going to vault it, go around there to hit them before they can do anything else. Let's say I got fooled by it, like if I genuinely got tricked by it. After I realised they're not, because I'd be about here when I'd realise, I would go straight back to get them. Now in this situation, you can't see where the killer is. Now you can just about see the red stain, I'm not sure if that would always be the case. So the second you see the red stain there, you could actually go for proper vault that time. However, do be warned because they might then go for you. If you're about here, the killer will see you there. They have to either go down to the pallet or down there. One of the two, they'll have to follow you around that way. Meaning you can make it into a big loop, because if you then go around here, you can then continue. You could even then go around this way. Do like a figure of eight almost, I guess. If they then follow you, then depending on what happens. Alternatively, you could also just run off to another loop at that point. I mean, especially if you're on a corner like here, you could see anywhere they could possibly sneak up. So that's very valuable. So yeah, I really hope I didn't miss anything from all that looping. Oh my words, this has gone on for ages. Now naturally, I did forget to say a few things. First of all, I didn't really explain that whenever you go into a match, the map you're in has random loops. The location of shack and main building are almost always the same, but the loops, to my knowledge, are always randomized. In a similar way that main building and shack can be rotated and all sorts of other stuff. Hence why, when I went through main building at Cold Tower, I was saying how, for example, the breakable walls, one of them is usually there at the top, that kind of stuff. Also, after looking back through all of this, I did indeed miss a loop. Hopefully this is the only one I've missed. Okay, do bear with me here because I'm not the best of artists. Can't be bothered to go into another Dead by Daylight game, so I'll try and map it out here. Okay, I think it's something like this. So, just for more clarity, I put the grey up here to symbolise where the window is, and the orange down here for where the pallet is. Anyway, this is not to scale or anything, but this is the rough idea, okay? Also, I'm pretty sure there's lockers around here. Okay, I just looked it up, and this is roughly what I was trying to get at here. So there's also a wall there, and a wall around here. Right, so let's go off this kind of setup then. This one is actually quite a strong loop for survivors. So let's say killer's over here, you're over here. You go past the pallet, so this hasn't been dropped. If they think you're about to then go along to this window to then vault, they might then try and cut you off that way. And like I've gone through before, there are a lot of mind games, so, you know, if you then think they're about to do that, and you instead stay by that pallet, they might then moonwalk by this lockers and try and hit you at that pallet somehow. If you've gone along to get to that window, and the killer then follows you, that's easy. That'd be very easy to then just bloop. Once you then vault the window, and the killer's here, they can either vault after you, go around this way, or go around this way. The ideal is for you to go around this way to get to the pallet again, so you can just keep on going in a circle like that. So the ideal would be for the killer to either vault after you, or go round to the left. If they go to the right, however, you then have the choice of either running around, maybe going off to another loop, trying to go around this way, although be warned because that wall might block your vision if they then do some kind of mind game around this area. Could, along there, get to the pallet, could try and do this in reverse. Another risky move could work out though is you then vault this. But bear in mind if the killer's over here and you're going off the red stain again, that kind of thing. Again, it can be a tricky one to pull off. They might hit you if you then vault over. I feel like I've already explained quite a lot about this whole loop and stuff. I will end it there. There we have it. Now, like I've said for every other guide I've made, I wouldn't be too surprised if there are certain things I missed out on, or possibly anything you're still confused by. You can probably just pop it down in the comments. Myself or maybe even someone else will then respond to it, explaining what the solution is. And also, of course, there are people who've played way more Dead by Daylight than me. So there are possibly some things that might have been said that are wrong. And one other thing I really do need to make clear is that personally, I think the best way to improve at Dead by Daylight is really just to play it more. Because especially for this game, I personally feel like experience is one of the most important things. Especially because even after watching this, and you do everything I say, there will be times when you mess up really badly in a game. Happens to everyone. I think that's about it.